Okay. Yeah. Um, and but we usually begin just with a little bit of like contemplative meditation for a couple minutes before we get into studying the text, the Tara Tantra. Um, I thought the last few times we've been doing this where we'll meditate a little bit on the something from the previous class. And so, we've been, and we'll do the, just a little bit on Buddha nature since that's what we're studying. So we'll go through just two verses to contemplate. One says, just as all-pervading space is subtle and therefore untainted by faults, in the same way this state in all sentient beings is not stained or altered by karma and mental afflictions. So we can just contemplate for a couple of minutes on how this is saying, right, is that within your, particularly focus on yourself, right? So within your own mental continuum, or within your own continuum, better way to say, within yourself, in other words. There is an aspect of you that is never touched or never stained or never altered. So as you think about like painful events that happen or difficult emotions, difficult experiences, here the Buddha, right? Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, Buddha Maitreya, also is saying there's an aspect of you, actually, and it's your true nature, right? Your final nature, your ultimate nature, is unstained, unaltered, can never be harmed. That just the space itself can never be harmed. That aspect of you can never be harmed. And notice how it feels to contemplate. Right? Also, there's an aspect of you that is never stained, never afflicted. Your mind suffers and has afflictions, but the nature of your mind doesn't. The deepest nature of your mind, your this aspect of you is like space, is like light. It's one of the metaphors used. Meaning, implies, right? Clear, unobstructed, unstained, unharmed. Sometimes the text says primordially pure. always pure, always clear. So notice, what's it like to contemplate? That's an aspect of my being. The text points out, right, like all different stars and planets, meteors, asteroids, right, even supernova, when they're exploding, all happen within space. And space is unaltered and unstained by any of those arisings. The metaphor we can just contemplate for a moment is all of your experiences from birth on have arisen within the space of the empty nature, ultimate nature of your own mind that we don't notice. But it's the substratum, it's the all those things couldn't arise if you didn't have that Buddha essence, the Tathagata Garbha. Like I usually don't, I notice all my experiences that are arising, but I don't pay attention to or notice or see the Tathagata Garbha, the ultimate nature of my mind, in which they all arise. If I don't realize that nature of mind, then what will continue to arise are experiences of suffering for myself and for others. But if one does realize that substratum, that primordially pure nature of mind that's always there, then eventually I'll become a Buddha, fully enlightened being. I think for ourselves, right? The nature of my mind is always there. If I'm happy, the nature of my mind is there. If I'm sad, it's equally there. If I'm Whether I'm joyful or enraged or terrified or contented, right? It's there equally in all those contexts. But when I don't realize it, then mental afflictions proliferate. If I do realize that nature of my own mind, which is already there, then that realization destroys the root of the mental afflictions. And allows oneself, right, to progress to Buddhahood. So it's up to me, right? That's what we think. Like I have this ability now to if no one pointed it out, then I wouldn't, then we don't notice it. But Maitreya in his text, in his teaching points out that we have this nature of mind. So then it's up to me, right? I can pay attention to other things that give rise to the mental afflictions. Or I can turn my attention to realizing the nature of my own mind and awaken to Buddhahood. So in the context of giving rise to bodhicitta, then we might think, right, all sentient beings, like, actually, if I don't realize the nature of my mind, then I'll cause suffering continuously. Only maybe somewhat in this life, but then it'll continue on and on, causing suffering to myself and to others. Whereas if I realize the nature of my mind, right, I become a source of peace for others, a source of well-being for others, and for myself, of course, also. People may feel, right, like some sense that because I already have that nature of mind, that primordial purity, that unstained, unharmed, space-like or light-like nature within me, now my motivation, my intention is to explore that, to see that, to awaken to that. In order to then be able to help others awaken. And awaken means, right, to stop following the mental afflictions, right? To uproot the mental afflictions, to uproot hatred, greed, right? Uproot like pride or arrogance or jealousy or all the different things that cause so much suffering. Help myself and others to awaken also means wisdom, right? Wisdom, understanding the ultimate nature of things and the conventional nature. I already have that nature within me that's capable of that. So my motivation then becomes to awaken that, to realize that, to see that, in order to free myself and others from suffering and its causes, and to lead others and myself to happiness, well-being. So with that in mind, I'll just once I'll recite that verse of refuge and bodhicitta. We can kind of contemplate it. I'll go through it slowly, just contemplate the meaning in the context of these verses from the Uttara. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, through the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So, for those who are following along in the text, we're on page 10, but I'll just remind us what we've been, we're on, we've been studying the Uttara Tantra first chapter, and we're up to the section that teaches about Buddha nature, which is a long section, longest section of text. And right now we're in like there are 10 aspects, 10 sort of points, I could say, about Buddha nature that that we just meditate on one of them. And we're up to the 9th of the 10 points, or 10 aspects, which is immutability. Right, so that's kind of what we were just meditating. So what immutability means right here is that whether you're like they say an impure being, a partially pure and partially impure being, or fully pure being, it means an ordinary person, a bodhisattva or a Buddha, that your Buddha nature is the same, right? It's immutable. It continues. It's unchanged. It's immutable in all three states, ordinary. And I always think that's funny in a way that from a Buddhist perspective, we have like lots of categories for we as people, we categorize people in all different ways, different cultures, right? We pick up ways of, right, whether it's socioeconomically or different, all kinds of bases for it. And the Buddha, and the Buddha himself actually, this came directly from the Buddha, really was his way of categorizing beings was you're either ordinary, which means you haven't realized the nature of the ultimate nature of yourself, or you're noble, right? It means you have realized the nature of the ultimate nature of who you are, or you're fully awakened Buddha, right? Those are from a Buddhist perspective, those are the meaningful categories, and other categories are not important from a Buddhist perspective. So Maitreya is following the Buddha in that way here, saying that these are the important categories. Because you could say that, right? You could say, well, if you're, the same thing would apply, right? Your Buddha nature is unstained if you're, regardless of whether you're tall or short, regardless of whether you have long hair or short hair, regardless of whether, you could do the same thing, right? But the Buddha says those categories don't matter, right? Like socioeconomic status, gender, all those. He doesn't emphasize the right. The Buddha emphasizes, are you, have you understood the nature of your mind or not? And to what extent? So what he's saying here, though, is that then the Buddha nature, right, or Tathagata Garbha, I'll call it, is unchanged, right, or is immutable. That's the way they translate it here, immutable, in all three states. So then we're starting in a section that's an extensive. Last time we ended with a kind of brief summary, but now we're going to go into the extensive explanation of that. And so the text says, just as space has never been burned by fire, likewise the basic element, that's meaning Buddha nature, right, has never been burned by the fires of death, sickness, and old age. So right, so the first point there is he's using a metaphor here, right? So he's saying space is not burned by fire, right? And here you can think of any fire, but actually later in the text he goes through 3 different kinds of fire, which we'll get to, but it's there's the fire. Anyway, I'll get to this later, but the point here is this: if you can use this metaphor. If a sun explodes, right, and becomes a supernova, it's like a humongous event, it looks like from our perspective. But space is not stained. Space is not harmed, right? And the space itself remains, is the point he's making. And then he's saying, in a similar way, and this is where you contemplate for yourself, right? When your body gets sick, right? So, which happens to everybody, right? It's one point the Buddha made, right? If you're a human, if you're born, and part of the nature of having been born is that you will get sick sometimes. It's just being a person. It's the nature of this life, of human life. And what he's saying is, when you get sick, your Buddha nature is unstained, is not sickened, right? Is not harmed. When you age, your body ages, but your Buddha nature doesn't age. And even when you die, right, your Buddha nature is unharmed. It continues. And we'll get in a few minutes, we'll get to a section where it's actually, if you think about that, we don't identify with our Buddha nature, right? So for us, if we're sick, we identify with the body. Actually, when they do scientific research on like pain management, for example, or what happens actually is we tend to hyperfocus. They've actually shown that part of people, if you have a part of your body that's not feeling well, we tend to hyperfocus on that part of our body. They actually have shown that in scientific research, right? So when they try to work on, they actually use mindfulness for pain management. They say, well, pay attention to things other than that part of your body. Don't hyperfocus on it, because if that's where your discomfort is and you're focusing mostly there, you feel worse. And when they do studies with that, people need less pain medication if they learn to do that. So it's been shown to be effective. But so my point is, we hyperfocus on what's causing us problems. What this is saying is, if you realize the basic element, right, the Buddha nature, then first of all, that doesn't happen, but you actually become free from that kind of, you actually, what we're going to get to, I was about to say, what we're going to get to in a minute is a section that gets into Arya Bodhisattvas, right? So bodhisattvas who have realized the nature of their own mind directly. It says, we'll get into how they experience or don't experience sickness, old age, and death. They approach those in a completely different way and experience. But I guess I'm just getting at, imagine that. Imagine if what your focus was because you had seen it. We don't actually meditated a lot on those, maybe on the nature of our ultimate nature of our mind, but like, actually, can you imagine that, right? Being somebody for whom then aging, sickness, and death are not frightening. What would that be like? That's being implied here, right? If you realize the nature of your mind, then those things don't. They actually say that in the some meditation instructions. They say that, like, for they say, like, well, they say it's actually appropriate to be afraid of death if you haven't meditated. They say fear of death is normal. In other words, it's not something abnormal. But if you've realized the nature of your mind, then death is like going home, they actually say. So the person's not afraid. Milarepa said that, right? He said, I went off to meditate fearing death. And then he said, now I don't fear anything. Which is getting at the same point that this text is getting at, right? He had realized the nature of his own mind. So he knew the part of himself that nothing could harm. Right? So he became fearless. Not fearless in a kind of arrogant way, but fearless in the sense of he actually knew what this text is getting at. So we'll keep exploring the text. It says, now the text gets into how it's untainted by birth, untainted by the phenomenon of birth. So it says, earth depends on water, water on air, and air on space, while space does not depend upon the elements of air, water, and earth. And then it gets into the metaphor here. Similarly, aggregates, constituents, and sense powers are based on karma and afflictions. Karma and afflictions are based on incorrect mental attention. Incorrect mental attention depends on the purity of mind, while the nature of mind does not abide in those phenomena. in all those phenomena. So what is this saying? Actually, this part I thought I want to slow down because it can be a little confusing. Because part of what it's getting, in order to, I mean, it's using a metaphor, right? This is actually a metaphor being used. But to understand the metaphor, you have to understand something about, it's actually, it's using, say this right. If you're not familiar with Indian sort of cosmology, then it might be confusing what the metaphor is, because the metaphor is depending upon an Indian cosmological point, which is, so when it says, Earth depends on water, water on air, and air on space. What it's getting at is kind of I guess I'll say, first of all, like Indian thinkers, I guess you'd say, were thinking about things like the Big Bang, or like the beginning of universes before the Buddha came. At one point, so actually, according to so you have to understand, I guess, to get this, you have to understand a couple of points, which is the Indian worldview of that time was that universes begin and end, and they can end with giant explosions, or where sort of everything implodes, or they can end with kind of in other ways, but and then a new universe forms, right? And that's a process that has no beginning and no end. That was isn't that fascinating? It was before
physics.
Yeah, before modern physics, I guess you'd say. But so they start with that was the worldview, that is that universes end and a new universe forms, and those happen over. They would have these like numbers, kalpas, they call them.
Kalpas and the
Yeah, all those different, and like.
Well, but aeon, I mean, it's the same sense of time that in Buddhism, it's
Humongous, yeah.
It's humongous, it goes on.
They actually have numbers for that. I was trying to remember, like,
Yeah,
the
it's
great
100, I know, I can see it in front of me, it's like 6.
A countless gradient is 10 to the 57th or 58th power. I forget. It's like,
yeah,
that's one length, and then there are other lengths, but I don't remember them all. But so in this view, one of the ways the universe forms, this is what this metaphor is getting at here, is that first there's empty space, and then they'll sometimes say, and when they say air depends on space, they don't mean air in the sense of like what we breathe on this planet, but like kind of gaseous, gaseous elements. So their view was that first there would be empty space, then the gaseous elements would sort of stir, and then liquids would form. When it says water, they mean liquids would form, and then solid earth, solid forms would happen. So when it says, and that's true in general, like actually when they talk about the wind element, oftentimes you'll see that in Tibetan Buddhist tradition. They'll talk about the wind element, the fire element, the earth element, and they're not talking. I want to be clear. It can be quite confusing, I think, sometimes, because sometimes the term lung, let's say, meaning air, can mean in Tibetan air, like the breath, but it can also mean gaseous, anything that's a gaseous element, and it can also mean subtle kind of energy that moves, versus. And water is ordinarily water, but can include other liquids and so on. So anyway, this is getting at that, right? So it's saying in the formation of a universe, there's empty space, then there are gaseous elements, then liquids, and then solid elements. So that's a metaphor anyway. They're using that as a metaphor here. And so the space in which it forms is Buddha nature, right? Is the ultimate nature of mind. Then I'm going to do it in the reverse order because it's the order it actually happens in, right? Because here they're doing it they're saying the grosser to the subtler. I'm going to go from subtle to gross to kind of elaborate their points, the points being made. So the most subtle is the nature of mind, which is like space, right? That's Buddha, what do you call it here? There are all these different terms they use, basic element, or Tathagata or terms, but let's say, so the Tathagata Garbha, which is space-like, then so the most subtle formation that happens, that's a beginning point, in the metaphorical thing would be gases or wind, right? And that's a metaphor for what he's calling here incorrect mental attention, incorrect mental attention. So what does that mean, actually? So what that's getting at is that there's there's like a famous line from a prayer in the Nyingma tradition, which says something like, it's a prayer to Kuntuzombo, but it says there's one ground but two paths and two fruitions. So the ground, in this sense, is your Buddha nature. Right? And then there are two, if you have incorrect mental engagement or mental attention, that's, so I guess I'll say it this way. We all have Buddha nature. If you're an enlightened being, there's no incorrect mental attention. And so that Buddha nature will manifest as Buddhahood, which we'll get to later. That's not what is being described here. Here, what's being described is the samsaric process, which means, so you have this nature of mind, right? And then within that nature of mind, we, ordinary people, engage in what he's calling incorrect mental attention, which means what? That there's an appearance due to past causes and conditions of something existing inherently, existing independently, in a way it doesn't exist. And you bring your attention to that appearance and you grasp at it as if it were true. That's incorrect mental attention. So, and the most common example is self, right? So your self appears to you in a certain way, which is happening, unfortunately, all the time, actually. Right? That, in other words, and we don't notice it, but you have a certain sense of who you are. They say there are sort of acquired ones we learn, but they're actually inborn ones from past lives that happen even in our dream. Actually, and even when you're dreaming, it happens, doesn't it? I was thinking that, like, I remembered I dreamt of a guy who was like my late uncle. I was last night I was trying to sort of have some interaction with him. There was a feeling of I there in my dream, though, like I want to talk to him or something, right? That feeling of I is there when we're asleep, it's there when we're awake. So the point is, this sense of intrinsically existent, independently existent, inherently existent something could be also mind, right? Well, even if the mind appears to us, we see our mind as if it were intrinsically existent, not as something empty of inherent existence. So whether it's your I or your nature, or you see your mind in the wrong way, or you see others in the wrong way, we have this incorrect mental attention that grasps at intrinsic existence. What it's saying here in the text is that incorrect mental attention is the first thing that happens that then gives rise to something else, which is like the water element. And that is karma and the mental afflictions. Yeah, Rajiv has a question.
Yeah, so that's the same thing as saying inappropriate attention.
Yeah, same. It's a translation.
From the phenomena.
Yeah. Just another translation of the same Tibetan idea. Yeah. So the incorrect or inappropriate mental attention gives rise to karma, and actually, really, it's the mental afflictions first, and then the karma, right? Because once you give rise to incorrect mental attention, from a Prasangika Madhyamaka perspective, that is a mental affliction, actually. Other schools say it's not, but Prasangikas say that is a mental affliction. And then based on that mental affliction, right, as soon as you give rise to a sense of I, let's say, or intrinsically existent I, then there's going to be other. Then sometimes you're going to want that other. Sometimes you're going to be averse to that other and hate it. Sometimes you're going to think you're better than the other, especially your words. And then it goes on from there. So you're going to give rise to mental afflictions. And then based on those mental afflictions, you do actions, right? So you want something, so you try to get it. You don't like you want to get something away from you because you don't like it, and you say something, you may say something harsh, or you may do something harsh, and so on. So then you do karma, right? So, and those are like the water element, or the liquid, right, element in this metaphor. And then based on the karma and mental afflictions, it says the aggregates, sensory sources, and constituents are like the earth, right, or like solid. It solidifies further, and what does that mean? When it says aggregate, sensory sources, and constituents, it means you get a body, right? Basically, right? That because of your karma, because of, so you have the nature of mind, right? Because of your grasping with inappropriate mental attention, you give rise to mental afflictions and you do actions. Those mental afflictions and actions throw you into a body, right? And that's, by the way, how you're here. Like, it's how we have these bodies, and this is and minds too, right? I mean, the aggregates include our mind and our body both, but we have some samsaric aggregates, right? That's what we could say here, and sense sources, and then all our experiences of this life arise in dependence upon that process. And so, and then it says here, so you can see, and they're making a point then, which is that our gross senses, right, our gross body, our gross thoughts, our gross depend upon something, which is karma and mental afflictions. The karma and mental afflictions depend upon something, which is incorrect mental attention. The incorrect mental attention can only arise in dependence upon that there's the nature of mind there. Right? But then it says, the mind's nature, just like the element of space, has no foundation and does not rest in incorrect mental attention. So it's saying the nature of your mind doesn't depend upon those other things, though. It doesn't arise in dependence upon those other things. And then it says, incorrect mental attention depends upon the nature of mind. Incorrect mental attention is the door for the emerging of karma and the afflictions. That's clear, isn't it? It's the basis, it's the door. From the karma, and now it says, from the karma and mental afflictions, which are like water, right? That was the metaphor. Aggregates, sense sources, and constituents derive. And then it says, now he makes a point here. He says, just as the water element springs up and vanishes, they too arise and disintegrate. So he's saying liquidity is a good metaphor for karma and mental afflictions. Why? Because they flow and they arise, and it's like waves on the ocean. They're continuously, once you have this incorrect mental attention, karma and mental afflictions arise continuously, like the flow of a river, or like like a spring, something springing, like a spring that has water coming out of it, or like the flow of a river is a good metaphor. So in other words, it's not static, but it's a continuous process that continually is arising. And this is for meditation, by the way, right? In other words, if you meditate and watch, actually you'll see that when they say, actually in the Lamrim, it says that. It says, well, if you start to develop when you try to develop calm abiding, in the very early stages, they say actually it's a continuous flow of mental afflictions, actually, of thoughts, of discursive thinking. And they say there will come a point where it's like you realize that you have a little bit of calm, but it's like what's the word? Like a river that's iced over. So you'll notice like you have a kind of certain level of stability, but there's still underlying it a continuous flow of stuff that's in your meditation. So you can meditate on this and you'll see it's true. He's getting it. So when he says the water element is like water, he's saying that's the metaphor, but there's a reason for using that as the metaphor, which is if you check your own experience, you'll notice that it's like that. Then he says, just like the element of space, so too the nature of mind lacks causes and conditions, lacks the collection of causes and conditions. It therefore has no arising, disintegration, and abiding. And that's right. Yeah, so I want to actually go back and say, because there are a few important points here, I think. And I wanted to first say, I wanted to actually make a reference to the first Panchen Lama, Losang Choki Gyaltsen, who was one of the great masters of Tibet. I have great respect for him, great teacher. He wrote a beautiful work, which there's a longer title to, but basically it's called A Debate. To put it simply, it's a debate between ignorance and wisdom.
Oh.
And it's a wonderful sort of poetic, almost like a drama, where he kind of has two parts, right? They're having a debate. One is primordial wisdom, and the other is ignorance grasping at true existence. And they debate the nature of the mind, the nature of existence. And he sort of plays out these philosophical issues in the context of a argument, discussion, something like that. But he gets at a point that's related to what's here, which is there comes a point when he's funny at times, and so there's a point where ignorance says to wisdom, we could apply this now quite easily. He was writing this in Tibet in the 1600s. But we could apply this now quite easily. So ignorance says to wisdom is starting to win the argument a bit. And then ignorance says, well, look, wait a second, you're irrelevant. Nobody cares about you. Look at the world. There's nobody in the world who cares about wisdom. Look, look around. People are, everybody's talking about me. I'm the center of attention. Like, go anywhere. Nobody's interested in what you have to say, it would appear. And then, you're kind of, look how weak you are. Nobody's listening to you, and then wisdom says what this text is saying. Wisdom says, basically, he doesn't use these words, I'm paraphrasing, right? But wisdom basically says, I'm weak. And he says, you only arise based on incorrect mental attention. So you arise based on something that's not there, a grasping at something that's not even there. And then all these different elaborations are elaborations on something that began with a grasping at something that wasn't there. None of it has any foundation. There's nothing actually behind all that your blowhard. He doesn't use this word, but like blowhard, right? Like wisdom kind of says like that, and then wisdom says, what I'm pointing out is the actual nature of reality that doesn't depend on anything else. Nothing can get rid of it. Nothing can destroy it. As we said, supernova couldn't destroy it. And so wisdom points out, it says, actually, for anyone who inquires, if somebody actually inquires, then ignorance is very weak, actually, because it's not based on anything real. So the text is getting at a point like that here, where it says, right, karma, where it says, just like the space element, so too the nature of mind lacks causes and conditions, lacks the collection of causes and conditions, right? So in other words, it doesn't depend upon anything. And what did Gyaltsab, Lama Tsongkhapa's disciple who wrote the commentary, says, which is, I'll just read it. The mere exclusion, right? Or we sometimes say the non-affirming negation, right? The mere, sometimes we call it a mere exclusion or non-affirming negation. It means the meaning of emptiness, right? How you realize emptiness is a non-affirming negation. It's a negation. What does that mean? It means you're negating something that didn't exist in the first place. Right? You're recognizing that something that never existed doesn't exist. And you don't have to assert something else to realize that. It says, so the mere exclusion or negation of intrinsic nature cannot be changed into something else by faults or by excellent qualities. All kinds of water become one taste. So do all things, in essence, emptiness of intrinsic identifiability. The ultimate truth cannot be changed into something else. It does not arise in different forms when it is experienced by the Aryas in their meditative absorptions. Thus, it is called immutable. So an Arya's meditation on emptiness, first of all, it's of one taste. It's an experience of the ultimate nature of things as they are. And what he's saying is that ultimate nature of things as they are is the actual nature of things, right? And so it has a kind of, what's the word? It's always there. It can't be destroyed. It's like, what's what you say, right? And if you realize that, right, then you have something. There are a couple of different points. One is you have something that will destroy the mental afflictions, right? Because it will destroy, if you realize that, you don't grasp at intrinsic existence, meaning you don't have inappropriate mental attention, therefore the mental afflictions don't arise, therefore karma doesn't arise, therefore you're free from taking on samsaric aggregates. And so the mind's nature of clear light, right, that's what he's referring to here, is unchanging like space. Those adventitious stains of desire, such as desire, which derive from wrong concepts, do not afflict the emptiness of mind. So actually, when we take refuge, from one perspective, we said this before, right? You can think of an external refuge, the Buddha, outside of us. But here, it's getting finding your Buddha, that the final refuge is your own eventual achievement of Buddhahood itself, right? That's the actual refuge in the end. When you become a Buddha, you have a true refuge. And if you can find that now, right, then that's the Dharma, actually, is when you realize that nature of mind. So it protects you from desire and wrong concepts, meaning from the mental afflictions and ignorance. John has his hand up, so I'll pause. John, if you have a comment or question.
I can understand how mental afflictions and karma arise from incorrect mental attention. But then the way the text is translated, it states that incorrect mental attention depends on, Buddha nature. And is there any discussion you're aware of about the mechanics of that? I mean, how does, it's almost like getting back to that question about, how did original sin come about? That sometimes people phrase it that way. So, and what you were saying earlier too, very, very interesting, that there are basically two avenues that we can take, and they arise at that point. We can either misperceive things or we perceive things correctly. And of course, in our world, or at least in mine, it looks like virtually everybody is misperceiving, right? So, is there any discussion you're aware of about how that dependence at that stage, at that incipient stage, arises?
So first of all, I'll make a couple points. And actually, when I, John, Gyume Khyentse Rinpoche, you know him. When he taught on this text, he addressed some of those issues in interesting ways. I'll share some of what I recall, at least, of what Khyentse Rinpoche said about that. So I think he made a couple points in relation to that. One is that he made one point, which is we have, the text here, and actually Gyaltsab makes this point also, the first of these, which is that the text says arise in dependence upon, and he said, but we have to understand one point, which is that there are two different ways that term can be used, and one is what we call I guess what we call it, I'll call it functional dependence. And so that is like a seed gives rise to, if I plant a oak acorn, then an oak tree can arise. If I plant a tomato seed, a tomato plant can arise. That's functional dependence, right? A kind of functional, so it's a functional interdependent relationship there. And when it says so in this text, when it's saying, the mental afflictions arise in dependence upon any correct mental attention, that's a functional relationship. And when it says, or karma arises, it says also karma, right? That's a functional relationship. And then when it says the constituents and the aggregates arise in dependence upon karma and mental afflictions, actually in the 12 links of dependent relation, it teaches that, right? That's a functional relationship where the one gives rise to the other in a kind of cause and effect method. And then Khyentse Rinpoche pointed out, he said, when it says, incorrect mental attention arises in dependence upon the basic element or the nature of mind, that's not a functional, that's not a cause and effect functional relationship in that sense. So we have to clarify that point. That there, what it's saying is because in other words, the ultimate nature of mind, which is emptiness, is not is only dependent or isn't in the sense that there's a basis and a label. So in other words, we can label. In other words, based on the emptiness of the mind, we can label emptiness of mind. So, and that depends upon their existing mind. But the nature of mind is not, what's the say, right? It's not a functioning thing. It's not a impermanent phenomena. It's not a conditioned, that's the word, conditioned phenomena. So since it's not a conditioned phenomena, it can't serve as an actual cause of anything else. So we can't say literally, in other words, it's not literally true that the emptiness, which is a non-affirming negation, is the cause of something else in a conditioned way because it's unconditioned. It's not arisen due to functional causes and conditions. So when we say here it's the cause, what it means it's a necessary condition. And going back to the metaphor, right, of planets or something like that, you could say like space was a necessary condition for the arising of the Earth. But you can't actually say it was the functional cause of the arising of the Earth. The functional cause of the arising of the Earth were particles of all different elements, right? I mean, hydrogen and oxygen and all the other elements on the planet, right? Could list many. I don't know how many there are. I guess how many are there now? They changed the list. I remember.
Oh, what of the periodic table?
Yeah, the periodic table. I can't remember the number, but anyway, those are the actual functional causes of conglomeration. But the space in which those elements were gathering was a necessary precondition. So Ken Rinpoche clarified, the nature of mind is a necessary precondition for the arising of incorrect mental attention, but it's not the actual cause. And now this gets at so that's for one point. Then you can answer the question you raised, which is, so what is the actual cause for, the actual functional cause for incorrect mental attention? And the answer to that is that it's actually it's subtle, isn't it? It's because first, due to the imprints of previous incorrect mental attention, like, so in other words, we're habituated to it, things appear in a manner other than how they actually exist to us. So that's first an appearance, and that's due to the previous. So like, and actually you can check your own experience just on a very simplistic level. If you perceive anything in a certain way over and over again, then if somebody holds up an image or something of that object, it'll appear to you in a certain way, right? Like if you like ice cream, and then somebody holds up a picture of ice cream, immediately it'll appear as something attractive to you, right? Actually, it's a drawing of ice cream, well done drawing. Actually, you can't eat it, right? But it still appears to you as though it's delicious or something, right? So there's an appearance that doesn't correspond to how it actually exists, right? It's a drawing, let's say. I'm giving an example here. So it's a drawing of ice cream, right? And then you look at it like, and you immediately have this feeling without any thought. Immediately, there's a feeling of attractiveness to you. But actually, as if it'd be delicious, but it's a drawing, you can't eat it. But so it appears one way as if it's delicious, but it's actually, let's say, paper. So my point is, we can check our own experience. This is true with everything, actually. It's not just that. All appearances appear to us in a way like that. So anyway, going back, what's the cause of incorrect mental attention from a functional perspective? Things appear to us in a manner other than they exist due to previous habituation to incorrect mental attention. And then, because we have the habit of grasping at such appearances as though they're true, we grasp at them as if it's true. We assent to it. We say, oh, yes, I exist that way, or this exists that way, or that. And so then with your question, John, like when Buddhist teachers analyze this, certainly in the Gelugpa tradition anyway, what they say is, well, in this moment, what's the cause of incorrect mental attention? It's the previous moment's incorrect mental attention. In the previous moment's incorrect mental attention, what was the cause of that? It was a previous moment's incorrect mental attention. And if you ask, I think I'm pretty sure, whenever I've asked in Gelugpa Lama this kind of question, what they'll say there's no beginning, right? Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say there's no beginning to that process. So there was no starting point where because each moment had a previous moment. And that's why there's a Lama Zopa would say it had no beginning but has an end. That was the way Lama Zopa put it, which was a beautiful point. But so that's the actual functional cause.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great explanation, and I've heard that before, but I just recently heard a teaching from, it was a sutra teaching, but the Lama veered off into a little bit of Tantra. And he addressed what I think is the same issue that we often hear this phrase, beginningless time. And of course, when we talk about habitual ways of thinking, and we try to find an incipient point, you know, the teaching that I've commonly heard of course, is that you can't really find that. That's like a mystery. But this Lama was saying that actually that's not true. So and this is entirely speculative on my part. I'm not really sure what his basis was for it. But I think he was saying something to the effect that in the event of any particular mind stream, there is a point at which that veering off into incorrect mental attention occurs. So I just found that extremely interesting, you know. And so what you were saying here, you know, reminded me of that. And I guess the one word, at least with regard to the way the text is being translated, because I don't know what the Tibetan or the Sanskrit was, but is using the word depend with regard to, you know, incorrect mental attention arising out of the basic nature. And, you know, your explanation about functional versus non-functional causation, you know, really helps. But
That
it's
was
just,
Tenzin Rinpoche explained it. Yeah, I mean that was his way of explaining that point. So
yeah, but it's just something. It's one of those things I continue to grapple with, you know, and it's just, to me, it's extremely interesting. But if any aha moment will arise out of it finally, I'm not sure, but
and one other point is like, and one thing I don't know, I mean, definitely the Gelugpa's scholars and meditators position is what I said. I have heard sometimes like a slightly different, I'm not sure, you know, but I've sometimes heard like from some Nyingma philosophers and teachers a slightly different take, but I don't totally understand it, to be honest, so I can't try to explain it. But the Gelugpa stance is definitely this idea of beginningless. The cause of ignorance is the previous moment, and it's beginningless, and that, and so on, and yeah.
well, that's the way they explain the emptiness of the mind, right? Is that it's just those composite moments of awareness. But yeah, I think again it finally gets to down to that point where you have to experience intrinsic awareness arising out of yourself. You know, that water poured into water event. Because we keep trying to apprehend something with, in my case anyway, the only apparent way I have of understanding, which is conceptual. And to somehow break out of that is the challenge.
Yep. Wilhelmina, looks like you were next.
Yeah, I am grappling right now with my shoulder and purification, and a spleen and a liver. I have purified most of the rest of my body, which is becoming more functional. And it also in my meditation. But those two, that shoulder, I was born with my feet first. So this shoulder has been bothering my whole life. And the spleen and the liver came later. the spleen and the liver I can explain, but the shoulder I was born with, so that is my karma too, to come into the world with something like that. How is that? How can you, for my mind, can you explain that? Because it seems that the spleen and the liver are also connected to that. That's my question.
I guess based on, if I could take, I mean, I don't know the details, of course, but if I think about your question in the context of what the text is teaching, then right, so those are the aggregate. If you think about where it says the metaphor is that the earth element is like the aggregates, right? So all of those, like your shoulder, your spleen, your liver, all the different parts of one's body, each of our bodies, right, are form aggregate, actually, right? So that would be, so actually, according to this, the way this text is teaching it, we would say, right, that the form aggregate is one of our aggregates, which is like the earth element in this metaphor. And it arose for all of us, actually, right? For all of us, our form aggregate is one of the 5 aggregates, and it arose for everybody, due to karma, unless you're Arya Bodhisattva, it's different. But if for ordinary people, it arose due to karma and mental afflictions. That's what the text was saying, right? So we all had in past lives, like mental afflictions that gave rise to karma, that then give rise to, and there's that then give rise to a body, and that's in the nature of that body that it will have suffering, like an illness, as we said, right? And so it'll have illnesses, pains, problems, sickness, and also aging, and so on. That's the nature of a body, and that arises due to karma, and mental afflictions. If we're a human being, of course, then the main throwing karma that gave us this life is a virtuous karma. Actually, it's good karma. But then they call it the completing karmas that cause things like certain experiences, a shoulder pain or other thing, would be like the completing karmas, which were due to mental afflictions in a past life. In some case, and if it's a suffering one, that would be a negative completing karma, but a positive main karma, throwing karma, that gave you a human life, of course. But then the important point, I think, from this text's perspective, that's true from this text, right? That it's karma, which came out of the mental afflictions. But then the important point from this text is, even while we're experiencing, as it says, illness, aging, and eventually all of us will experience death, even while all that's happening, right, our Buddha nature is unstained. So as it's happening, right, as anybody experiences like pain or illness, then the basic element of their being is beyond harm, is not harmed, is not stained, is not injured, is not sick. So I think that's the key point of this text, is saying, yes, that happens due to karma and mental afflictions, and at the same time, the basic element, or the Tathagata Garbha, your fundamental nature, is never touched, never harmed, never hurt, never stained by any of that. So I think that's the way the text would explain it.
Yeah, I can feel that it's coming to a solution. And I'm looking at my mother, and I looked up if the Kagyu and our lineage, if they have the same opinion on that. And it says yes. And I have a text from the first Lama that you called the Kagyu in the 1600s.
Oh, yeah.
Where he discussed that too. That was on Facebook. So I found it there. and it all seems to start to work together. Yeah, it is beautiful.
He says that, yeah, they all come together at the same point.
Yeah, it is something that spoke to me.
Me too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Lynn, did you have you had your hand up too?
I recently got cataract surgery on one eye. So I'm really attached to thinking, because I don't need glasses anymore, okay, out of this one eye. So I'm really attached to this is the way things really are. Seeing out of the eye, I don't need glasses for. And of course, that's totally wrong, right? But it's interesting because how I see things is sort of a metaphor. I see things differently because of different lenses. So the cause is different lenses in my eyes, but it's really, I'm not looking, it's emptiness. Everything is emptiness. So how I'm seeing it is dependent on the lens in that particular eye. So it's really interesting to sort of notice my own grasping at the eye that now doesn't need glasses, because I'm like, oh, that's how things really are. Well, that's not how things really are. It's all dependent on the particular lens. So it's sort of a great metaphor for what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, what a great meta. I was thinking that you could go like this and just
Yeah.
just keep switching eyes and then contemplate. You could like do that and then stop and meditate and then do that again. That's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a great awareness you bring to it though. Yeah.
Well, I thinking about it is like, I'm so attached to the eye with the new lens now. And it's like, no, that's not real. That's all empty too. So it's like the attachment is so strong to wanting to see something the way you think it is. And of course, that's not right.
And I think it shows how much for all of us. I mean, I think what's amazing is you bring that awareness, and you're very good at that, I think. And I think implicit in that is we all bring, what's the word? Like, it's a good reminder of how much we all grasp at
Right.
how things appear to our body in particular, and to our bodies themselves. Like, it's remarkable the degree to which, I mean, for myself, the degree to which I do that. Instinctually, actually, it's a kind of instinctual, and that people who have realized the nature of who have directly realized the nature of their mind don't do that. Actually, they don't have that. They don't grasp in the same way, and it's just fascinating, I think, to contemplate that, right? Like, and you can't. For me, I guess one thing of just my own contemplation, as you can, is that like I would love to, but you can't. You know, just like I can't force myself to not do that. I can notice when I do it, as you're doing, and then recognize that can serve as a motivation to keep meditating, to keep trying to, because it's, what's there to say, right? None of us can stop ourselves from grasping at that until we realize, and this is what the text is saying, if you realize the nature of mind, then all of that will stop, or just, will stop fully, will gradually stop, or to varying degrees, depending on how much one's realized, but or how deeply. But it's wonderful to see what you're describing, because it can then serve as a kind of, wow, it really is, or is I can see that how I see it is not, and what I grasp at isn't how it is, and yet I can't stop the grasping yet, but eventually I can, because it arose due to causes and conditions. That's wonderful, I think, awareness to bring.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, but my sense is people in this group probably much more advanced than I am, but always had a fundamental hope that they would see things clearly, their mind would see things clearly, and releasing that or seeing that in a different way is hard to do. It's like hard to think, oh yeah, I have to think of seeing things in the correct way different than seeing things as I have much of my life or my whole life.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So anyway.
Oh, and then Jody has her hand up.
I'm having somewhat. Is that echoing for you guys?
A little bit. That's okay. We can still hear
Okay.
you.
Maybe can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm having a similar but different experience as my mother's dementia gets worse. Watching how her mind has she has the same inputs. I'm there with her, having the same experience, but her mind is just telling her an entirely different story about what is happening. And if I'm not there and she calls me up, like, I really struggle to try to read through what she's saying to what would fit my idea of what happened. And it's given me a lot to think about. Yeah.
Wow.
Just throwing that out there.
Wow. It's profound, isn't it? I'll just hear one more, or just for John or Evan. Obviously, I don't know. I mean, what you're saying makes sense, and to me, it just gets at something which I find disturbing but true. You know, Chandrakirti in his Majjhimaka Avatara, you know, he sort of says many things. I mean, he says many things, but he gets to this point where, and one time I remember when she was teaching on too. It's, how do you say it the right way? Like, you know, things appear to us in a certain way due to causes and conditions, right? Like, and it's quite disturbing because, like, in other words, you know, I guess, you know, Chandrakirti says, like, using your point about your mother as the example, he sort of makes this point where he says, you know, the difference between your way of perceiving who don't have dementia and your mom's who do, he sort of says, Chandrakirti kind of says, well, those differences, other people can like, worldly discussion can figure those out. They're not terribly important. What matters is that from his perspective, right, because he's addressing the ultimate nature of reality, is that both are in error. You know, Chandrakirti makes this point. He says, you know, like that both are in error, right? Is your way of perceiving and your mother's way of perceiving are both in error. And then he says, you know, he's not denying conventional significance. And so he says, yes, you know, worldly people can make that determination, but that's not what's important. What's important is actually realizing the way in which they're both wrong, which I find quite disturbing if you think about it. It's a very deeply disturbing point he makes. So anyway, that's not an answer, but just
Yeah.
sort of
No, but that's exactly what that has me thinking about. I want to say my way is right and hers is wrong, but
You know,
no, like we
think that
both are wrong in the same way.
I think, you know, what was occurring to me, and I think you used this word earlier, Lauren, you used the word forced. Every one of us, unless we've seen emptiness directly, we're at the mercy of the karma that's forced on us. It's not a choice how we perceive the world. Certainly not a choice to have a view of the world that's that we call dementia. But you know, until such time that we can somehow short circuit that collection of karma, you know, by getting rid of our mental afflictions, that's it. We're at the mercy of that. So I think that's the whole basis of renunciation, right? The motivation of renunciation.
Jan has a comment.
I just, and I don't mean to quibble, but I don't feel like I'm at the mercy of my karma. You know, when my father had dementia, my brother would say he functions on habit as opposed to, you know, really sitting down and thinking deeply about whatever action he might take. But he was like that throughout his life. You know, he never met Dharma. But I guess being at the mercy of my karma seems to me to defeat the teaching. I mean, or try, there's a contradiction in it. and I don't even know what it is, but it seems to be, that phrase seems to be negating something. Of course, it's empty from its own side, but does that make sense? I'm just quibbling with semantics, and I understand that.
You're getting at the point of free will.
Well,
something-
isn't karma about, I mean, isn't dharma about being cognizant of it's my responsibility?
I think what I heard in that comment was in relation to dementia in particular. With dementia, we lose the capacity to overcome our karmic conditioning. And so in that sense, we're
At
at
the
mercy
mercy
of,
of-
because our mind doesn't any longer have the ability.
Okay, yeah, that's clear. No, that clarifies it, all right.
Okay.
Cause I'm attached to something with mercy,
Mercy's good.
the word.
Oh, at mercy of versus mercy, I get it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's fine. Mercy's good, but being at the mercy is not so
No,
good.
right. Thank you. That was-
Did you have, somebody else said something, somebody had a hand up, I couldn't remember, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with the idea of continuum of consciousness from one life to another. And if that's the pure mind, if that's the luminous mind that goes from one life to another, if we're talking about the Buddha nature. So in the text here, it's saying that, you know, the nature of mind lacks causes and conditions, it has no arising disintegration. But it seems like the continuation of consciousness is some kind of a dependent arising. So it seems like a little bit of a contradiction. I don't know.
I agree, actually, I think, one thing we have to differentiate between, I think it's a very important point that you're getting at, is that we have to I think the best way to put it is we have to differentiate between mind and the nature of mind. So in other words, that mind is a conditioned phenomena. It is impermanent. It changes instant by instant. It actually, mind can be afflicted, right? There's, you know, if somebody's, for example, feeling hateful, their mind is filled with hatred in that moment. And to deny that would be a kind of nihilism, actually, right? So in other words, and so the mind that goes from life to life, if we say the mind that goes from life to life, it's a functioning thing, it's impermanent, it's depends on causes and conditions, including the previous moment of consciousness and so on. That's what Dharmakirti makes a big point of sort of pointing that out. But it's the nature of mind. So we differentiate, right? Like in other words, even as the mind is filled with hatred, let's say, the nature of the mind, because it's the non-affirming negation, is not, you know, it's a mere absence of intrinsic existence. That's not stained. That mere absence of intrinsic existence is not stained by hatred. You know, and even as the person is dying, right, like their mind is changing for sure, right? But the nature of their mind remains empty of intrinsic existence. So I think we have to differentiate those two, or it can become quite confusing. And and sometimes there's a danger, I think, if somebody says, you know, that otherwise we could sort of be nihilistic and say, you know, so in other words, from the perspective of the ultimate nature of mind, there's no birth, there's no death, but from the perspective of mind, of course, there's birth and death, you know, because it quite impacts on, you know, so does that sort of address that? To really carefully differentiate those, the conventional and the ultimate,
Right.
is really important point.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do you have something too?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I had a question, piggybacking on the depends on nature of mind that John asked. So you talked about habitual tendencies of actually having an inappropriate attention. Are we talking about subtle imprints, the views that we have about projections and stuff like that? Is that what you're doing?
Do you mean like for why it appears a certain way, or why we grasp at it, or which are you?
I think we projections more like, you know, we have a tendency of expecting things, projecting things, you know, getting into things. That'd be part of subtle habits that we have. And that is dependent.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yes, that's right. Yeah, which is dependent upon previous habit, yeah, previous tendency to do that. And it's why, yeah, it's why like people, you know, and if you look around, right, it's why people have totally different ones, right? Like one person expects, actually, if you can sit, sometimes it's funny, isn't it? If you sit with actual people, you see this, you know, two people in the same space, maybe in the same room or same place or something. And one expects this and the other person expects the exact opposite.
Right.
And they're sitting there, you know, and it's because they have different habit, you know, different habitual tendencies. So they expect the opposite thing to happen. And yeah, so that's
So that'd
totally.
be a subtle obscuration, that's exactly what it is. Because you're conceptualizing still, and it's dependent.
That can be, it can also be gross though, right? Like, because if you think of like, if I expect, let's say if I'll give an example, like if I expect people to be mean to me, I'm just giving a very simplistic example, right? If I go around the world and I think, oh, everybody's going to be mean to me, that's how the world is. That's pretty gross, actually, level of, you know, that's not a subtle, that's, you know, kind of gross, you know, but so it doesn't have to be subtle, I guess is the only point.
Doesn't have-
Yeah, it can be subtle, but it can also be gross kind of level of conceptual thought.
Thank you.
But maybe I'll finish this little, because we're almost done with one little part here. So the summary, right? So it said the mind, I read this part, the mind's nature of clear light is unchanging, like space. Those adventitious stains, such as desire, which derive from wrong concepts, do not afflict the emptiness of the mind. So that's clear, right? They don't afflict. That's what we were getting at just now. Even if you're in hatred afflicts the mind, but it doesn't afflict the emptiness of the mind. It doesn't afflict the nature of mind. Then it says, neither do karma and the afflictions likened to water and so on produce the basic element, nor will it be burned by the intolerable fires of death, sickness, and old age. And so I think that's all quite clear. But actually, oh yeah, this is what I wanted to get at earlier. So let's do this first and then we'll stop. So it says there are three kinds of, so we were going through the different elements, right? Earth, you know, water. So now where it says fire, then it makes it mentions three kinds here. It says the fire at the end of time, the fire of hell, and ordinary fire should be understood in this order as being similar to the three fires of death, sickness, and old age. And so what that's saying, it's using a kind of metaphor, right? Where it's saying we've been going through the elements and using these elements as metaphors for things. And it says, so now it's saying, and the point here is that fire destroys, right? Fire burns things up. And so it's saying we're going to use three kinds of fire as the metaphor. So the fire at the end of time, that's like the fire at the end, you know, when the universe implodes and there's, you know, everything, the entire universe gathers back together and burns in a cosmic fire. And it's saying that is like death. That's a metaphor for death, right? At the end of a universe, and actually it's kind of true, isn't it? You know, it's like if you're a self-centered being, when you die, it's the end of your personal universe. You know, it's a reasonable metaphor, right? It's like, and it's funny, isn't it? Like it's kind of like what Jody was pointing out, right? Like about the example you gave, Jody, of yourself and your mother. I was thinking that just recently because I knew recently. I was a few friends that died, and I was thinking that like the person in the next apartment over is not like they're, you know, one person's dying in an apartment, right? They're literally dying that moment, and the person in the next apartment over could be, whatever, you know, like planning their kids' school day for the next day, and not aware, right? It's two different. So for the person who's dying, it's like their universe is imploding. For the other person, it's like it's just another day. It has no particular significance to them. So the fire at the end of the time is a metaphor for death, the destruction of your personal universe. If you're a self-centered being, if you're not a self-centered being, then it's not like that. They say, which we'll get to later in the text. But then they say the fire of hell is a metaphor for sickness. Right, because it afflicts one with, and at times, right, certain sicknesses can be so overwhelming to people that it can really feel like you're in hell, can't it? So it's a metaphor for that. Sometimes sickness can be, and of course, I always note this, and you know, in Buddhism, I always think that hell is temporary. You know, there is no permanent hell in Buddhism. Like sometimes in other traditions, there's an idea of eternal damnation or eternal. In Buddhism, there's no such idea, actually.
Except there's lots of.
Yeah, there are many hells, but they're all temporary. In Buddhism, there are many hells and they're all temporary, and they're created due to causes and conditions, which means they end. So sicknesses end also. Sometimes they end by getting better, sometimes they end with death. They always end, don't they? And then ordinary fire, like fires like a campfire or whatever, or a cooking fire, those are likened here to aging, which burns up, so, and the idea is death burns up, our life is burned up and
Right.
left, in this, in the sickness, our health, our well-being, our sense of well-being is burned up, our sense of health, and in aging, our youth is burned away. And so those are the three metaphors. And so you get the point here, though. He's using these different elements as metaphors for our actual experiences. And at the start of next class, we'll do a little of this, is I think, I'm not going to go on past that verse because we're time this up, but I'll just say, like I often point out, these metaphors and these teachings are for contemplation and for meditation, so, and they're useful in that way, and so like when you think of like, actually, if you think of when you're sick, right? Like to recognize it is a kind of burning off. It's also a burning off of the karma, right? At that point, karma caused, it's not, we all have that karma. If you're born a human being, you're going to get sick. It's part of the nature of being a human being. And it's temporary, and you sort of recognize that and you think about it. And then you recognize, and then you might contemplate, what's the aspect of my being that's not sick, that can never be sick? Can I imagine that non-affirming negation, the ultimate nature of mind, that's unaffected and that can never be touched and never be harmed by illness. When you're dying, can you actually imagine that, to connect to the part of your being that's beyond birth and death? So these are metaphors for contemplation, is my point. And all of them, right? The water as being like the mental afflictions that arise and bubble up and flow away. And so they're all points for contemplation. So next class, we'll start with a little bit of contemplation on those, and then we'll go on and continue. This is a long section, so we'll continue on through, contemplating these various points, but we should stop there. So, and thanks for the questions and comments, everybody. Conclude with the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow, or it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, so that the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, in order to lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And finally, may we all realize our own Buddha nature, which is like space, is beyond. May each of us, who by contemplating this text, eventually realize the ultimate nature of our own mind, which is beyond birth and death, which can never be stained or harmed, which never has been and never will be. And may we thereby become free from suffering and its causes, and therefore be able to help others limitlessly to be free from their causes, the causes of their suffering, and the actual sufferings that come from those causes. May this lead to that kind of result for us and all beings. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks for the comments.
Thank you, Lauren. See ya.
See you soon.